Hello, welcome to this presentation. My name is Fergal Anderson and I'm from Tallaght Bio, and I'm going to be talking about those three things, LaVia Campesina, food sovereignty, and agroecology. Now, they're not three things that we're particularly familiar with as concepts in Ireland, and that's why I suppose we're trying to, raise awareness of what they mean and where we're coming from when we're talking about those three things. And food sovereignty leads us to agroecology. So, what is agroecology? Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's in one sense a very innovative way of looking at agricultural production. So, it studies ecological processes that exist within ecology and nature, and applies those to agricultural production systems. So, it's trying to look at the interaction between natural ecological processes and the interventions that we make as farmers in food production. And it explores those things not in a kind of top-down way, but in a very bottom-up way, where farmers talk to one another, explore the how those systems work, and try and build knowledge from the bottom up. So that's almost a replication of some traditional systems too. So it's a way of doing farming, I suppose, and a way of doing research, which puts the farmers at the center. Within that, it's a set of principles, and there are a set of agricultural practices which focus on, I suppose, diversification, biodiversity, energy efficiency, and not losing, also water management and carbon and things like that. And those, are building upon, what may be traditional practice, or not, and are exploring ways of improving and constantly evolving and learning how we can do things better. So it's also a process of constant learning and development. But beyond those sets of principles and interactions that kind of define how we produce and how we learn how we produce, it's also a social movement. So it talks about building community, building knowledge, and how we can interact with the communities around us. So I suppose, an agroecological farm is going to have a different footprint than a conventional one on many levels, not just in terms of how it produces food, but perhaps how it interacts as well with the community around it, how the farmer, the relationship of the farmer with the land, people, and community in which he or she is based. And I suppose that's a very important element of agroecology, and probably what differentiates it in some ways from other more technical production systems. This is just a short video kind of explaining what agroecology is all about.
In the 1950s and 60s, the world saw an explosion of new farming technologies. This green revolution increased crop yields and promised us prosperity, but it also polluted soils and water, marginalized small-scale farmers, and erased traditional crops and diets. As agricultural landscapes have become more and more uniform, wildlife habitats have been lost, creating the perfect conditions for dangerous diseases to spill over into human populations. So what now? Do we double down on intensive farming? More techno fixes to outrun pests and control our environment? Actually, the future of farming could be very different. Across the world, communities are converging around a simple but powerful concept: agroecology. Agroecology is a way of farming with nature, not against it. It builds resilience to climate change and disease outbreaks by combining different plants and animals based on farmers' knowledge of their local environments. Agroecology doesn't rely on chemicals to fertilize crops and fight pests. It relies on diversity, and diversity in the field means fresh and nutritious foods for communities. It provides secure livelihoods based on cooperation, solidarity, and short supply chains that retain value in the community. Agroecology is a different way of organizing food systems, based on different principles. So do we stay trapped in the 20th century, or can we embrace agroecology as the next evolution in food systems?
So there you go. So agroecology does offer us an alternative to the existing model. Yeah, and that agroecological model is, I suppose, one of two paths that are emerging internationally. And humanity has a lot of decisions ahead of it, and I suppose some huge challenges, not least of which is climate change and the loss of biodiversity, catastrophic loss of biodiversity internationally. So these two paths are emerging about how we can interact with the land to produce food for ourselves and meet our primary needs. One conventional industrial model, and the other one agroecological. And the approaches are very different in almost every way. And I've tried to outline some of them here. One is very specialized, crops and monocultures. The other, much more integrated, diverse, and you have polycultures of crops, mixed cropping. The second, biotech, petrochemical technofix, um, that tries to find solutions to problems which are based in an application of new technologies. For example, biotechnology, or new inputs, or pesticides, herbicides, etc. Whereas the other one would look at biology and trying to find regenerative systems which utilize biology, for example, soil biology, to resolve problems or in production systems. There's a rigid centralized food chain versus a flexible decentralized food web. The privatization of natural resources, and the idea that we should keep some resources in community managed commons, particularly those water resources and other natural habitats which are of huge importance in in managing our agri-environmental surroundings. One is based on lowering labor costs, for example, and a rural exodus, a lot of the time replacing labor with machinery, etc. And the other one recognizes the work that goes into food production and thinks it should be fairly rewarded, sees value in it in and of itself. Food production is work. I'm saying that as a farmer myself, but there's a lot of good value that comes out of that work too. And I suppose there's advantages to it, and it offers a lot to people, I think, as well in the modern age. One is industrial processes and the other artisanal. So that's about the kind of application of what kind of processes that you put that food through. Environmental destruction against environmental regeneration. There's a lot of talk about regenerative farming at the moment, and that would be within the ecological land use practices would exist, regenerative farming, as a way of regenerating, actually improving lost ecosystems and ecological restoration in the landscape. And the last one, I suppose, is important, that trade based on competition and trade based on solidarity. And I suppose I'll just reiterate that. I mean, nobody wants to work and have their work lead to the loss of somebody else's job somewhere else. I mean, I'm farming here, and I don't want my farming here to negatively impact on a farmer somewhere else and their livelihood. So what we want to see is that everyone has fair access to food and the other resources they need to survive, and that we distribute those and trade those and exchange those in a way which benefits us all, rather than benefits a minority at the expense of a majority very often. So recognition for agroecology, it's not something we've just pulled out of a hat. It's a very popular and well understood theme internationally. LaVia Campesina and other social movements internationally came together in 2015 to make a declaration of agroecology, which kind of put a shape around what it meant, so it doesn't become co-opted like so many terms do become. It was included in the EU Farm to Fork strategy, which looks at how we can reduce agrochemical use in Europe over the next number of years. And it was also recognized by the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. They identified it as having 10 points based on these: diversity, co-creation and sharing of knowledge, synergies between different systems, efficiency, recycling, resilience, human and social values, culture and food traditions, responsible governance, and circular and solidarity economy. And I suppose in that sense, it kind of demonstrates a little bit the integrated nature of agroecology, not just as a set of technical principles, but also as a set of values about how society functions and how we interact and govern and develop policies. So it's grown from just something that's very much based on how we use the land to how we use the land and how we interact with culture and society around that. So Talamh Beo. Well, Talamh Beo are one of the only organizations that I think of in Ireland that are supporting this idea of agroecology and an agroecological transition. So we see it as that kind of broad framework for production, how we can integrate the social elements and communities of practice into food and agriculture going forward. And we've kind of settled upon this definition. And I won't read it all there, you can read it yourselves, I guess, but I suppose it's important that it recognizes that agroecology is different from according to people and place, and it also kind of tries to group in those ideas like permaculture, regenerative farming, agroforestry, organics, biological farming are all part of that broad family of agroecological land use practices. So, I mean, we have a lot of people in Ireland practicing different aspects of agroecological production systems and agroecology. And I suppose what we're trying to do is say, look, we're all working in the same direction here. We're not going to sit down and make some very, very tight set of definitions of what is or isn't, because it really is a set of principles rather than and guidelines rather than something like the organic standard or something which has its rules, etc. So we want to keep that church as broad as possible. And I guess that's it. So there's more information on our website, www.tulipbio.ie, and yeah, let's see what we can do to develop food sovereignty, agroecology, and the work of LaVia Campesina in Ireland together. Thank you very much.